7th, 2023. This is a workshop with the Lake County Board of Commissioners. One of the topics that we'll be discussing today is we do have before us a memo regarding the roads and bridges concerns. I did ask our prosecutor's office to define what the statutory perspective is. I know historically most people are familiar with custom and past practice, but it's always a good idea to find out what the legal foundation is for roads and bridges. Mr. Hackman, I don't know if you want to address this memo or introduce it, or do you want me to take a swing at it?
It speaks for itself, in my opinion, Commissioner.
Okay, so if I may, just we'll just start off with, and this was addressed to me, Commissioner John Hamerchak. You requested an opinion regarding the relationship between the Board of Commissioners and the engineer relating to the repair and improvements of county roads. Specifically, you asked, does the Board of Commissioners or the county engineer have primary authority for the repair and improvement of county roads? Answer, the Board of Commissioners, in addition to the appropriation of reasonable funding necessary for the engineer's operation to maintain county roads, has the final authority over the recommendation of road repair and road improvement projects prepared by the engineer in accordance with RC 315.08 and presented as part of RC 5543.02 annual report. And it does go into the law and discussion for more detail, and it does come back to a conclusion of similar wording, which is literally the same wording. So, not to make a bad pun, but the rubber has met the road. We also have a draft resolution to take on the previously discussed roads of Payne Road, retaining wall and culvert, Ford Road Bridge, Williams Road slope failure. It was necessary, as we've been discussing in recent commissioner meetings, the Blair Road retaining walls for the failing wall issue. There was a detectable movement from the last weather event that we had of significance that came through, so that was added. The first tranche is proposed to be $10 million less the already moved forward $1,306,968.42. Again, it was previously allocated. That would be under resolution number 2023-0810, which came under the heading of BC4, and it was adopted on August 10, 2023. So now is the time and place to have this conversation, because this is something that the public, one, wants to know about here, but also legally we have to have this conversation in a public venue, because discussions, deliberations, and decisions are likely to follow. So with that said, Engineer Gills, anything you want to add, sir?
Nope, it says it all.
Thank you. Anything else legal that you want to add?
No, sir.
Okay. Gentlemen, the floor is ours.
Mr. President,
Sir.
being that this memorandum and pending draft is new to us, the things that I see that stick out is, the project's bigger, the money's bigger. For previous conversations with the engineer where we would go out for bid and fund it as we go. I don't, as we learned from Williams Road, that whatever we planned on funding got a lot bigger as we went through the process. So I believe that Blair Road was added, and we need the estimates, I guess. Is that just estimates from the engineer's office? So we don't have any idea what the actual cost is?
That's based on the amount of money that we submitted to Public Works. We were able to secure $500,000, and that we're talking about match money here on local share, and that's based on that particular estimate.
But how confident are we in that estimate, I guess is my
Come again?
How confident are we in that estimate?
In today's bidding market, about as confident as you can make it, which is not a lot of confidence. The market is all over the place, depending on when and where and what's available and what kind of work it is. It's very, very, very difficult. It's a moving target. The best thing we can do is come up with some numbers, which is what we did for the Public Works grant to justify that. And now that particular project was cut in half. We isolated, that is isolating the wall and the section of road improvement that is parallel to the wall. And because that is presently the most important part of that particular project. The other half of the project is strictly paving. We can work that in as we go.
We had discussion early on with your complete list of projects that was $16 million. And now at tranche one, we're at $10 million.
Well, actually, what we did there, as part of the whole program, we looked at the overall system, the emergency projects, the pending emergency projects were the two big ones that are somewhere around this particular number. And then we looked at our road program and what roads are bad that we really could use some serious work. And we just since we were coming in and with our hat in our hand, we decided to include the whole program as an open for discussion as to what we really what the board might consider in terms of these projects and the future.
So it's safe to say that the $16 million wouldn't touch.
Well, that was a little more of a whoosh thing, but you got to start someplace. Depends on how important the board considers the various projects. Had we got into a discussion about all of the projects, we would have broken them down individually and gone through each one and allowed the board to decide what it was able to fund and what it wasn't able to fund. It doesn't mean that we're not going to fund these projects. These projects, we will continue to look for money, and we'll work it through our budget as best we can. But our budget is very limited.
I believe during our discussions, we committed on the projects that were in tranche one previous to Blair Road being added, and we were working down that path.
Well, Blair Road's always been part of the whole program. It's just a matter right now. It's kind of holding its own. But you might remember I also said that most likely Blair Road will be closed in 2024 because it's not going to last. So and closing Blair Road is becoming more critical because as we go along, and the other two roads of Ford and Payne are closed, that cuts Leroy off. Period. So it's becoming more critical, and that last rain, that big storm that we had, did not help.
Well, I guess if anybody else has comments or.
Mr. President,
Sir.
I think we need to have a more broad-ranging and positive approach to this issue, which is why I've asked our county administrator by close of business today to look into the procedures to do a full performance audit from the Ohio Auditor of State of the Engineer's Office. We need to make sure we're looking top-down so that we can have ideal procedures. We've talked about making sure this doesn't happen again. We've talked about how can we better use the budget we currently have, because obviously money doesn't grow on trees and expenses keep going up and up and up. Rather than politicize or have tickers or waste time and money, I think we need to be a little bit more serious and make sure that we have a sustainable long-term solution. I understand that the prosecutor is very accommodating in giving opinions, but we already know that the Commissioner's Office is responsible for appropriating every penny to every department that the county spends. We appropriate all the funding, we move all funds. You can't do a fund transfer without a vote of the Board of Commissioners. So, this is nothing that we're not aware of already, and I don't want to just spin the wheels. I want to accomplish something in this process. I think it's very critical that we have a long-term plan to make sure that we are spending every dime and dollar in the most effective way. And we also have to recognize that the general fund and Lake County taxpayers cannot just be asked over and over and over again to make up the difference when we don't have the long-term plan to take care of the issues at hand. I don't believe that the townships want to put any money forward, and I would ask our assistant prosecutor, has there been any transfers from the townships into the Road and Bridges Fund?
I'm unaware of it, and quite frankly, I don't get involved in the budget, Commissioner.
Well, unaware of any transfers, and we can certainly get confirmation. And we've never asked for that support of that funding, but I remember getting the question, what transfers have been made from the county? I mean, we can ask that of the federal government, the state government, the county government, the township government, and we can make political points, but I'm more interested in paving the roads and bridges, and more importantly, making sure that we are on a schedule to keep them paved. Because fixing one road deals with one community, but there will be the next and the next and the next. This is not a problem that's going to go away. As long as we have cars and vehicles, we're going to need these roads, and so we've got to make sure that we keep this sustained. So I think we need to have a full performance audit as quickly as possible. I'm aware that Commissioner Regovich had a solution with a memorandum of understanding that was rejected by the engineer's office. So that's obviously delayed negotiations somewhat. I understand that different parties have their reasons, and I respect that, but I think it needs to be acknowledged that a solution was provided, and now we have to go back and find another one. And we will work collaboratively with local government and all of our departments to find the best solution, but I think it's important to note that a solution was proffered and rejected, and so now we have to come up with another solution. And I'm confident that we will, but I think we need to have a better working attitude together because this is not an opportunity to just send angry residents one way or the other. I'm very good at that. I mean, if we really want to have that kind of a debate, we'll win, but everybody loses when you have that kind of debate. What we need to do is have a long-term sustainable plan to spend every dime and dollar in the most effective way so that we never come back together again and say, uh-oh, there's no money, there's no money, there's no money. That is not an acceptable answer for keeping a road or a bridge open. And I agree completely with Madison Township that it is unacceptable that it takes 2 years to reopen a road or a bridge. That's insane. That's not acceptable by any standard. And the solution that we find can't be just to reopen it next year. It has to be, this will never, emphasis on the word never, happen again. That's my position, and I'm going to advocate as powerfully as I can for it. I recognize that everyone is strained, that supply chain and inflation and labor shortages make it difficult for our engineer's office, for the county, for the townships, for the McDonald's. These are problems that we are all collectively facing together, and we have to acknowledge that, but at the same time, we can't use it as an excuse, because I don't see inflation going away tomorrow. I don't see the work shortage ending tomorrow. We have to find ways to work through it, and our residents deserve that effort. But I don't know what more can be said other than we need to make sure that we're utilizing the dollars in the engineer's office in the best possible way. We're going to have to go back to the drawing board because the engineer did not find the help that the county commissioners proposed acceptable. And we're going to keep going down that path. But I'm not here to point fingers and blame. And I know that the easiest thing to do when a resident comes to you and says, I'm mad, my road is closed, is to say, that's the person who screwed it up. Go yell at him, go yell at her. But that's not going to open the road. That's not going to pave the bridge. It's not going to fix the problem. I also think it may be worth looking, and frankly, I'm going to say it may be worth looking at whether or not there are some shorter term fixes. We've heard from one of our most respected mayors, who's a long-term contractor, that he believes that there are solutions that could be engaged to open these roads more quickly while we work on the permanent replacement or longer term solution. I think that when you're telling residents, best case scenario, it's going to take a year, you have to consider, is there a way we can reopen it within the next couple of weeks or months while we work on that longer term solution? I don't think it's fair to expect homeowners, residents to wait indefinitely. even if it's not a funding issue, even if it's just a bidding issue, even if it's just a construction and design and a labor issue, it doesn't really matter. From their perspective, my road is closed regardless of what the reason is. And so I don't think a 2-year window is ever acceptable. So that's my position for what it's worth, and I look forward to hearing from our county administrator about how we can go about engaging the auditor so that we can make sure that we have a long-term plan and we never come back to this point again.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just to kind of clear this up and get it off the table, though, the memorandum of understanding that had been worked out and discussed was not supported by controlling law, which was the genesis of the memorandum, the memorandum from our prosecuting attorney. The revised code is clear that the reasonable funding necessary is the responsibility of the Board of Lake County Commissioners. We have been very fortunate that historically our county engineer has been able to scrape together funding, and I think it is fair to say that earlier this year our engineer did come to this board during the budget process and throw up the flag of, hey guys, we have a problem. That the road and bridge reports that come before us annually did indicate that there was a serious concern of decline, and that the structure in particular, we're talking about Ford Road, I believe that's about a 130-year-old structure. I don't know how much life you want to squeeze out of that, but I think the people of Madison, their tax dollars are worth the same tax dollars as other parts of the county, and they deserve to be respected as such. I do have to say the broader picture, and I agree, we have to look big picture. We are looking at a jail project that is going to be the single largest project in the history of Lake County. If we can't handle this, I'm concerned that the charge levied against us, I believe at our last meeting, about bad government may be true. And bond counsel, one of the things that they will look at is leadership and future capital expenses. I think it's reasonable that we can engage this. The funds do exist. We have historically paid for infrastructure projects out of economic development funds. Not too many years ago, we actually put $1.5 million out to the individual municipalities to spend as they saw fit to take care of needs that they were the most closely familiar with. It was an extremely well-received program, and many of the communities were able to achieve necessary improvements that they otherwise would not have been able to do. But at the end of the day, though, we are still faced with a very real situation. And again, the revised code is plain. It is this board's responsibility. I don't disagree with you about, again, thinking big picture, but if we're thinking big picture, we have to look at all of the bits and pieces of that big picture, not just selective ones. So, that being said, we do have a draft resolution that I believe should be given due consideration at today's commissioner meeting. Is there anything on that we need to go over?
Mr. President, it's not really a resolution. It's just a check for $10 million minus the $1.3 million. And we've already discussed how that in and of itself is not acceptable. This is not about a bailout. We need to find a long-term solution to this problem. So I understand that there's a very simple piece of paper here that says $10 million minus what's already transferred. I don't see anything beyond that here. So it's obviously, I wouldn't even say it's a draft. It's not even begun.
Well, I'll let legal speak to the legal definition, but if I could offer maybe a simplified explanation. Our public safety forces, when they arrive on a traffic scene, they take care of the injured first. They take care of the immediate threat first. They'll do the accident reconstruction and the analysis after the fact. Right now, we have closed roads and bridges that need to be addressed. They cannot be addressed without funding. I agree that we need to go back and review how we got here. I think the answers are going to be plain and simple, but we need to properly fund this. We need to meet our statutory requirement to provide reasonable funding necessary. Commissioner Regovich, anything you want to add to this, sir?
Just, you say you want to take it from economic development fund. I'm not even sure there's $10 million in an economic development fund. So I don't know where the money's coming from, what funds or where we have it allocated currently. But those are things I would like to know. Because, you know, if we're gonna deplete some fund, which one are we depleting?
Well, it's all the general fund, all the numbers are, the monies are actually commingled, they're just fund accountability. But we have talked exhaustively about our economic development funds. We've also talked about additional interest income, which was not previously budgeted. The monies are there.
And most of the money is for payroll protection and things of that nature that were put in place in 2012 because we didn't have those kind of things available and we were in financial crisis. So in order for that not to happen again, I also worry that this number is way higher than when we started in tranche 1 a very short time ago.
The payroll, liability, budget stabilization, those are all separate funds. They're all part of the general fund. The last number that I think we've all publicly talked about is 114 million. I don't think that's significantly changed. I suppose we could call our budget director to speak to this specifically, but at the end of the day, I want to look to legal. This is, again, a matter of law. We do have a legal obligation to provide, and again, I'm using the language from this reasonable funding necessary.
Well, yes, that's correct. And as indicated in the memorandum, the revised code sets forth 3 classes of public highways: state roads, county roads, township roads. And with regard to county roads, in discussing those, says those roads shall be maintained by the Board of County Commissioners. That's the last legal backdrop authority. That's I really can't add more than that. I'm not
Sure.
familiar with the budget,
And that's fair.
the economic development budget. Those are things that I defer to Mr. Matus in terms of how much is in it and things like that.
And I think you said the operative word there, backdrop. You know, this is the backstop, the last line of defense. And I'll go back to our county engineer, sir. Other than the $500,000 that you were able to secure for the Blair Road retaining walls, are there other dollars that you have been able to secure or would likely be able to secure? Or have you exhausted all of those options at this point?
At this particular point, all those options have been exhausted. As you know, they keep, every time they make money available in a program, they exclude roads and bridges, both federally and state-wise of late. So we don't have any other choice. We'll continue looking, but remember, once we have a contract with a contractor, they are no longer eligible. There are no such things as reimbursement.
Which I believe you're alluding to the clawback discussions that have been previously had. Once we enter into making a repair or improvement, once that is funded, we can't claw that back with the anticipation of additional funds being made available to something that has already been performed. Am I stating that correctly, sir?
No, you're not. Realistically, once you sign a contract for the work to be done, that money now is allocated and is no longer, that project is no longer eligible for any kind of reimbursement, because at that point it becomes a reimbursement and not a excuse me, a grant or whatever.
And the fine point that I believe you just put on it is not only is it work that has already been performed, but like work that has already been committed to be performed.
Correct. Yeah, once you have a contractor, in fact, the project is underway, under construction. Now, regardless whether he's moved on or not, only because he needs time to gather his forces and move into the project.
When you say that'd be the mobilization component and staffing up the whole supply chain, all that process that goes along with that.
Correct.
So we still have the outstanding issue of are we or are we not going to meet our statutory obligation for reasonable funding necessary? That seems to be the question of the day.
Mr. President, that's your definition of the question. Once again, the commissioners are required to appropriate every penny that's spent. Being told that we have a legal requirement to appropriate or to transfer monies from one fund to another, that is the definition of a county commissioner. We already know that. And I'd rather not spend time and resources talking about what we already know. The very first responsibility of the county engineer is to keep up and repair the county roads and bridges. That's in the ORC too. And he is funded by the state. Now, he's told us that funding is insufficient and that he doesn't know how to make it work. Now, I appreciate that he is making his best efforts. I'm not suggesting that the engineer is not. But we need to make sure that we are addressing the solution for the future. And it is not going to be sustainable to say that the general fund is going to have to pay for county roads and bridges going forward. That is not going to last. It's going to put this county in a situation where we are going to be pressed to raise taxes. And that is not something that I will ever support. And it's not something that Lake County residents will ever support. So we need to work within our means. That's what we're called to do. That's what everyone at their kitchen table has to do, and that's what we are going to do. Now, we provided a solution. It was rejected. Now we're forced to go back to the drawing board. I wish that the solution had been accepted. But I'm happy and I am willing to try again. If solution A isn't acceptable to the engineer, we'll go to solution B, we'll go to solution C, we'll keep working. But in the meanwhile, I want a full performance audit. Good government is accountable government. Good government is looked at from top to bottom, and I think we've reached that point. I think we're well past that point. I also think we may want to consider hiring some outside consultants to take a fresh look at these problems, because we've heard very contradictory opinions between Deputy Engineer Alan Exley and once again, one of the most respected officials in Lake County, Mr. John Mara, Mayor of Timberlake. I think we may have to, before we invest 10, 20, God knows how many millions of dollars, because these numbers have gone up unbelievably from the first conversation. I think Commissioner Regovich is right that it's concerning that we see so much fluctuation, and that, once again, is not insinuating any wrongdoing on anyone's part. This is a very unstable economy with inflation, but given the enormous investment that you are proposing, I think we need to have a 100% surety when we go to the taxpayer and say, we have explored every option from every perspective. I don't expect that our engineer's office has every type of expert and every type of engineer. It would be impossible for a county our size to have that. It's not a criticism of his office to say that we might need a second look. But if you're going to talk about spending $10 million in one shot, there's going to have to be some consulting done. And I do just want to say one thing. About the jail. I wish to goodness that past boards of commissioners had listened to the recommendations that they received and had built the jail earlier. My understanding is that initial estimates were far closer to 70 than 170 million. If we'd taken that project on when interest rates were less than 2%, if we'd taken that project on when labor and materials costs were considerably lower, then maybe we would have an extra $100-some million. But we're all well aware that the $114 million that keeps being cited has been spent 100 ways to Sunday. Not 7 ways to Sunday, 100 ways to Sunday. Even if every penny of it were spent on the jail project, we'd still need to borrow almost $70 million. And we know that we can't spend all $114 million because there does have to be budget stabilization, economic development, bond issuances, and bond counsel and rating agencies are not going to be pleased to see that we spent every single penny, so that if there's a hole in the roof or a problem, we don't have any resources to address it. We can't spend every penny in Lake County government and go down to a balance of zero. I'm not saying anything that the other commissioners don't know. We all accept and understand this. But if we're going to be asked to make an investment of $10 million plus, which is up from a few $1 million for the first tranche in the course of a couple of months, I want a performance audit by the state. I want external engineering opinions looking at each of these problems. I want to see if there's a way we can open these roads immediately, and by that I mean months rather than years, before we make that kind of investment. If we're going to spend $10 million, we better be darn sure it's spent correctly. It's way higher than the past estimates. And once again, that's not a critique of anyone. It's an acknowledgement that when you throw around numbers like that, you don't just vote and spend money. Tax and spend is bad government. And if someone at the township level wants to fully fund the project and go forward with it today, that's fine. But if they don't, and it's left to us, then we need to, as the stewards of the taxpayer dollar at the county level, make sure that we are proposing the best solution and make sure that this never happens again.
Thank you, sir. Looking to legal.
Commissioner, if I may, just,
For you, sir.
again, I want to make it clear, the engineer in his annual report suggests projects to do. He prepares specifications and makes recommendations with regard to road projects. That annual report that you submit, Mr. Gills, the Board of Commissioners does not have to follow it. They can look to another road and say, we're going to put our resources here. So it's the preparation is the responsibility of the engineer. It's the Board of Commissioners have the ultimate authority as to which project is dealt with. Now, I'm not talking about amounts of money, budgets, things like that. I'm just saying that at the end of the day, the responsibility for the maintenance of these county roads is on this Board of Commissioners.
I think you might have actually just answered one of my questions. Wow. So the reference to the memorandum of understanding, which is referred to as being rejected, is not acceptable. I think we should give some definition as to why it was the recommendation on the decision on the part of the engineer not to enter into the the memorandum of understanding was at the advice of the prosecutor's office, after reviewing the document, concluded that it was not an instrument that would properly reflect what the intent was. I believe there's some.
Well, Commissioner, to that I would say that was an attorney-client privilege discussion. Mr. Gills is more than able, if he should so choose, to waive that privilege and discuss why it is the document was not signed.
Understood, sir. And I think you answered my question about my interpretation of the plain meaning associated with the memorandum and the revised code, when I consistently refer back to reasonable funding necessary, that it is not my interpretation, it is the interpretation of not only myself, not only our prosecutor, but also the Attorney General of the state of Ohio. In the most recent opinion, I believe it was 2021,
Yes.
where that language sourced from. So,
Correct.
and you're acknowledging correct. Thank you, sir. And in reference to the $114 million that's been spent 7 ways since Sunday or something, nice reference, by the way. If that were actually true, we wouldn't have that money, so there are many demands upon it, and I do appreciate your acknowledging that there are a great deal of capital needs that are going to be making a number of demands against that. But this is a healthy environment to have this conversation, and appropriate. That being said, again, I don't disagree with, we do need to analyze the process of how we got here and how we can best handle the future, but we do still have the immediate need before us, and we have had every one of these projects before us for several months, and none of these numbers should be a surprise. We've been receiving constant updates, and again, I draw you back to references of reopening a 130-year-old structure that was designed before motor vehicles even existed. This was designed for horse and buggy and foot traffic, and now we're expected to be running normal vehicle traffic across it by modern standards. There is a bit of a disconnect there. So again, that being said, I'm going to look to legal. The resolution, the draft resolution that we have before us, I believe it captures the discussions to date. Is that a reasonable
I've
statement?
reviewed it. It does appear to do so.
And looking to the engineer, sir, you've made us aware of a number of projects. The only one that got moved up, and that was because of the most recent storm event. The only one that got moved up was the Blair Road retaining walls, and they are starting to shift. So, am I incorrect in the interpretation that every one of these, Payne Road retaining wall and culvert, Ford Road bridge, and Williams Road slope failure, all 3 of those have been before us for the longest time, and they were all part of the Tranche 1 discussion, and because of the most recent events, Blair Road did get moved up into this. Have I said anything that's not accurate, sir?
That's correct. By the way, to update you on Payne Road, on Tuesday we sent the final estimate up to Jason for processing. So it is ready to go as soon as the money is ready to go.
And looking forward, and I'm referring back to your generated document titled County Roads and Bridge Need, the priority 2, pending closures. On that was the Blair Road retaining wall issues, but I think this also deserves to have the conversation regarding the St. Clair Road bridge deck repair. As I believe has been explained to this body previously, that deck does need to be replaced. It is allowing infiltration of corrosive materials and waters, which are actually degrading the bridge structure. So while we're in this conversation, that could go from a simple bridge deck replacement to a necessity to replace the entire bridge. Do you want to add to that, discuss that, or did I just pretty much summarize it?
Well, I think you summarized it pretty good, right? What that project is all about is there are holes in that bridge, and we filled them and filled them and filled them and filled them, and we can't keep up with it. The bridge deck needs to be actually the top 2 or 3 inches needs to be removed and completely, and these holes repaired in a much more detailed manner, and then a new deck, that 2 or 3 inches put back on as a wearing surface. It would be in concrete, and that project at the final estimate on that particular project, and the engineering is done on that, is $700,000.
Thank you, sir. And that $700,000 would be the replacement of the deck and necessary.
That was the engineer's estimate that came from our consultant. The type of removal is a very specialty type of work, and so we have a professional that is familiar with that, and he prepared plans.
Okay.
Mr. President,
Yes, sir.
question for Mr. Hackman. Given that a lot of these projects, even full speed, are going to have to be done next year, can we pass a resolution to hold back a certain amount? I want to know what control we have over the state funding that comes in the engineer's office, just to make sure we reserve from whatever the state gives X million dollars that goes directly into a certain project. Do we have the authority to do that?
I've never researched that.
That would be an interesting
particular
question,
issue.
because if we could have a hold on, $3 million for this road or $2 million for that road, it would be some difficult adjustments. But given the priority and the safety issue, it might be important to just say, hey, whatever may come of the $10 million or so that comes from the state, let's hold back $3 million for this road and just get her done. And then we'll find out in the following year how we restructure to get there. I want to make sure we're looking at all solutions and all possibilities here. If we're going to talk about completely draining our economic development fund, which is really the goose that lays the golden eggs, we're talking about the future of the county and future revenues, we need to be looking at existing expenditures and maximizing their usefulness. And if it's possible that we know this road project's going to be done next year, we can just say, hey, we're going to make sure in the next engineer's budget that of the $10 million or so we are projected to get from the state, we are definitely holding $3 million back just for this road project. I'd really like to know if that's an option given to us, given the high level of authority that the prosecutor's office sees us in having in making decisions on roads and bridges, is if we can specify to that level and say, hey, let's just make sure, no matter how we do it, no matter how we have to rearrange things, we can hold $3 million back for this road. And I would really like to know if we have that authority.
I could look into that. Quite frankly, I'm not so sure Mr. Matus doesn't already have projections, things like that in place. Again, I'm not a budget guy, but
well, not
I understand
projection,
your
but the
question.
legal authority of whether we can just say we're holding back X amount of dollars from the next engineer's budget for this road because it's such a high priority that nothing else compares to it. I mean, we're reaching that point with a lot of these roads. We just have to say, no matter how difficult the decisions are, if we can just carve that out, that would be, I think, a very positive thing from the residents' standpoint, because we want to make their priorities our priorities.
So just to be clear though, I'm not just asking for a finer point. We're not talking about terminating the Route 2 maintenance to try to recapture that $1 million that the county engineer is putting into that. That's not what you're suggesting?
I don't know where you got that question. I'm asking whether or not the county commissioners have the legal authority to say, we are going to spend X percent or X million dollars of the engineer's budget that he is receiving from the state on this particular road project. Because if we can choose the road projects that are worked on, can we also say of the $10 million that the engineer is getting from the state, we are definitely spending 3 of that 10 on Ford Road or 2 of that 10 on Blair Road, etc. I want to know if we have that authority. Now, how we exercise it is a completely different question, but I want to know if we have that authority.
And just for your benefit, the foundation of my question about Route 2, again, being familiar with the engineer's budget, the only non-mandated large ticket item that I personally am aware of is Route 2, and that's about $1 million a year. Terminating that agreement would then shift that responsibility back to the municipalities. The only section of Route 2 that would still remain under the engineers would be that which I believe is going through Painesville Township. County engineer, am I correct on that, sir?
That's correct.
So, again, I'm just trying to think where, if we were to hold back money or to cut anything that is not mandated, that's the only non-mandated thing, and I believe we just renewed that agreement last year. I'm trying to think of the timing on that, so when those funds would be able to be freed up. I'm looking to both legal and Jim. I apologize, I don't know when that contract was recently renewed. Was it last year or earlier this year?
Well, remember, you also have $1 million a year that we receive that is allocated to debt service for the previous roads and bridges that we did in 2019, 2020, and 21 to 22. So you can't touch that. So now you're talking about taking $4 million, isolating $4 million out of a $9.5 million budget, and that almost cuts my number in half, and there won't be any work done on anything if that happens, much less for the Road 2.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. President, I think this illustrates exactly why we need a performance audit. The fact that we're having to have these hypothetical conversations rather than just zeroing in on here's where dollar A can go to need B. I think we have to immediately proceed. And I'm looking forward to hearing the procedures from our county engineer and our county administrator, who's going to be working with the auditor's office to find out how we can apply. I think we need to get this done sooner rather than later. Because at the end of the day, our conventional wisdom may not be true. There may be solutions that can save an enormous amount of money in the engineer's office. There may be functions that we can outsource. There may be different techniques or procedures we can use that could free up an enormous amount of funding. We don't know, and we need to find out, because we're not talking about 1 year's budget. We're talking about the future here. And $10 million a year every single year is a lot of money. We shouldn't be talking hypothetically about it. We should have a drilled down answer. And does anyone know when's the last time we had a performance audit of the engineer's office?
I think we can answer that question because it's never been done, and I think you already knew that before you stated it. But being a good attorney, you already knew that. Performance audits are very rarely done, and sometimes they are of interesting value, but if that's your choice and desire, research the heck out of it. But it still remains before us. We have roads that are closed. We have another road, Blair Road, that is pending closure. And we have a solution to properly fund this so the engineer can move forward. And I would also say that on projects, and I'll look to the engineer, if things come in under budget, those dollars are returned back to their source. So if it, by some miracle, is not $10 million, it comes in at $6 million, that's $4 million back in the kitty. The logic associated with, let's analyze how we got here, seems to be ignoring the fact that we're here. We're here now with real needs, and our engineer needs the necessary funding. And again, I'll continue to use reasonable funding necessary. It's not my words. Those are the words that we have to abide by. So we're there now. And I don't think we're going to be able to pass the hat to the townships and have any reasonable expectation that they're going to help bail us out. And again, I draw us back to our engineer who historically has found ways to fund things, but I think the term perfect storm has come up numerous times. And I think it also offers false hope to people when you say that you can take a 130-year-old structure that was never designed for motor vehicles and say, by God, we can put this thing back in service for the foreseeable future. I think we have to trust our engineers that there are limits. And our forefathers, although they were great craftsmen, I don't think even they had envisioned the loads and burdens that are being assigned to this structure that I believe has been correctly closed for safety purposes. Engineer Gills, anything you want to add to that, sir?
Mr. President,
Sir.
I've spent a lot of time and effort the last couple months trying to prioritize getting these, at least the 3 projects done. I think that's no secret. The thing that, is disconcerting to me is the amount of money that's in front of us here. And I would love to speak to Mr. Matus and find out his plan on how to fund this, where it's coming from, where it's, I know you think all that money is in a just floating out there. We're going to grab it, but he has a plan for our money. He just doesn't have it sit there. So, and I think that then, if we have to change this resolution or modify the resolution, then it should go in the SIG file where we all can look at it like traditionally we do.
Well, we're now in the 9th month of this year, so everything that's captured in this, but I think in fairness to our budget finance director, Mr. Matus, he is a recommender, not a decision maker. That is our role, and his role is to find ways to make our decisions work. So again, and then there's also been a number of times when Mr. Matus, and I'm just going to call it for what it is, it appeared that Mr. Matus was being thrown under the bus of, oh, he's on vacation. We can't answer that question. We should be able to answer those questions that have come up, and I don't want to put Mr. Matus in a position where it sounds like he is the guru and the go-to guy who is the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, the all-powerful Mike Matus. Great guy, but he is a recommender, not a decider.
I agree, and I want to hear what he recommends because this is way different than what he recommended me in the past.
Jason, could you see if Mike's available and have him come in, please? We still have a few minutes. Thank you, sir. So with that said, looking forward, as long as we're looking big picture, we do have just on the Conway Roads and Bridge need, we do have a number of items which were not in the priority 1 or priority 2 list that I believe were in the 80-20 category, where there are dollars committed to those, but we still need the 20% match. And if we don't get that 20% match, those dollars go away and very likely will not come back.
I believe there are at least 3 bridges on that to the tune of about $3 million, which would go away to that. And there's $600,000 floating around over the next 2 or 3 years. I feel that, well, first of all, these are emergency projects. There's no way at the magnitude that these are coming off. You have to remember, we're coming off some critical, unexpected expenses from, again, projects that failed that we weren't ready for. One was the Cowell Road Bridge, and that particular bridge ridiculously was twice as much as we originally anticipated. That was money that we didn't expect to spend. We also had the Madison Avenue wall that we're all familiar with. There is almost $2.4 million there that came out of our budget that we did not expect. And we scraped pretty much everything to the bottom of the barrel, which is what which is what caused us to come forward and say we have these other unexpected and pending closures. We need we've exhausted everything that we have. We have exhausted everything, every search in every corner that we could, including asking Jerry Servino to come up with money from the state, which was turned down again by the state legislature, particularly the House. And so at that particular point, with the attitude of the House and on a state level and the federal government saying, well, all this money that we're giving away is not for roads and bridges, we ended at a dead end point, and we have no other choice but to come forward and ask the board to help us out. And there is no money in my budget for debt service at all.
Thank you, sir. Jason, was Mike available?
He's gonna make his way down.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so we've addressed County Roads, that one. Are there any questions on this memorandum from our prosecutor's office? Hi, Mike.
Good morning, Commissioners. How are you?
Mr. President,
Sir.
I would just ask Mr. Hackman if he's aware of the grave mistake at the very top of his memorandum.
What mistake are you referring to, Commissioner?
We did not elect a vice president this year.
It's a field
That's
project.
my mistake. I apologize.
Except you gave me an honor to which is not appropriately assigned. But in all seriousness, we know that county commissioners appropriate all funds of the county. That's not a question I needed answered for me. And the conversations that I'm going to have with Mr. Matus are going to go for many, many, many hours, because there are going to be some painful decisions that are going to have to be made to meet these needs in the long term, and no department is going to be happy about them. But that's the way it's meant to be. People expect their government to make the sacrifice, not to ask them to make the sacrifice. We don't just tax and spend in Lake County, and I am grateful for the expertise and the hard work of our staff who make recommendations to us.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mike, sorry to hit you with this cold, but I know you're up to the task. If I could just read the pertinent part of the proposed resolution. The paragraph is, the projected total cost for tranche 1 is estimated via the Lake County engineer to be $10 million, less the $1,360,968.42 previously allocated in resolution 20230810 of BC4 adopted on August 10, 2023. So the question that we have for you is, if we were to proceed with the passage of this resolution, would you be able to properly move the monies around to fund this resolution if it was approved?
I've had numerous conversations with each commissioner individually. There's a couple different ways to do it. You can either bond it or you can pay cash for it. I'm not a decision maker. I'm only a recommender. Of course, if you pay cash for it, you're going to save on interest. However, we have a lot of capital projects that we're putting in place. I emailed you guys yesterday to ask about your priorities for 2024. That I'm going to start the budget process, which I already have. Jails, roads, I hear all of it. I need 2 commissioners to tell me what they want to do. I've asked you guys a few times with that via questions about that. I can only recommend. I give you options. That's what Jason and I do. I'm not trying to get him involved with this, but once 2 of you guys tell me what to do, I try to carry out your plan. So, I know one person, 1, I've talked to each individual. 1 + 1 is 2. You weren't on the same page. So guess what? I need another person to tell me how to do this. What is the thing I outlined a couple weeks ago? I heard you guys about public safety. I heard you guys about the roads and bridges. I heard about the public safety facility. This is an ongoing project. Like I said, I was put in a task a few years back when we did the additional $5. We were doing one project, and the commissioners at the time said, Mike, develop a plan with Mr. Gills to get as much done based on the current revenue stream that we had with the additional $5, which is $1 million. That was our debt service, basically. That was all pledged with that. I know Commissioner Hammercheck was on the board. I believe he was the only one on the board at that time. And we had some heated debate on that funding and approving a $5. Like I said, I've given you guys all the options for the jail and for the roads. I just need some direction. That's all I ask. It doesn't matter what my thoughts are. I'm not a decision maker. That's what the people put you guys there for. I just give you options.
Mr. President, since we do have Mr. Matus here, a couple of questions that I'd like to get confirmation on. Mr. Matus, we discussed this before you arrived, so forgive me for repeating, but to the best of your knowledge, and I know you've been with the county for a while, have we ever had a performance audit of the engineer's office, yes or no?
No.
Mr. Matus, I know that in the past you've worked for the...
Am I getting cross-examined here, or what?
I want to confirm quickly and efficiently for the folks out there as well as for the decision makers that we're correct, because I don't want to make assumptions when we're talking about millions of dollars. Mr. Matus, did you formerly work for the Ohio Auditor's Office?
Yes.
Do you believe that the Ohio Auditor's Office adds value when they give performance audits to different departments and functions of government?
Answering it just like if you were cross-examining me. Depends. It all depends. We've had an audit done when Maureen Kelly was here as the clerk of courts. It all depends on the department that's doing it, if they're forthcoming with it. A performance audit could be great, or it could be not so great.
So the key issue is whether the department cooperates with the Ohio Auditor's Office, because the Ohio Auditor does good work.
I worked there for 5 years. I liked the job, and I thought we did a good job. I haven't been there for 17 years. Like I said, performance audits, it's all who they pick as the manager for the performance audit, the help of the commissioner's staff, as well as the elected official department. Like I said, it all depends on how open the department is and the commissioners for both. So
we also asked the question, has anyone other than the Board of Commissioners transferred funding to the Road and Bridge Fund? Is any other entity, whether it be federal, state, township, or are we the only ones who've stepped up to put monies in that fund? The newly created fund?
The newly created fund, it's only us. I'm sorry, because I was going to say, let me answer your question with the license tax and so forth. Every license ties. I didn't know that if that's where you were going, because every person that has an auto license or drives a car, they contribute to the roads and bridge somehow. So the new created fund, to answer your question, the specific question, the county general fund was the one that put $1.3 million in so far.
And no one else has?
No.
So the commissioners, where no one else has stepped up, have?
The commissioners did transfer funds to that.
And no one else has?
No.
Now, I know you work closely with Commissioner Regovich on the Memorandum of Understanding and the compromise. I just want to thank you for that hard work and effort. I know that it was not accepted, but that's why we're still here, still working on this. I appreciate that It's not always easy to bring different departments together. They have their own ideas and their own game plans. But I've asked the prosecutor's office to look into whether or not we can reserve discrete amounts of money in the engineer's budget in future years, because much of this work, even if we go full speed ahead, is going to have to be done next year. So I want you to be as helpful as possible in working with them. So if we were to say, have a vote, we're going to hold back $3 million for this road, it's guaranteed to go to it from the engineer's budget. And we'll figure out how that works later. I want to find out if we have the authority to do that. So I want you to be as cooperative as possible with the prosecutor so we can get that done. Jason Boyd is going to be reaching out to the Ohio Auditor of State to see how we can apply for a performance audit. I know as a former member of that office, she'll be very helpful in helping him figure that process out, because we want to do this sooner rather than later. It's time to make sure that we have a firm foundation. I'm not satisfied with saying, it's 3 million, it's 10 million, it's gosh knows how many million. We're just going to keep writing bigger and bigger checks. We need to make sure we know exactly how this money is going to be spent in the most effective way. And I also want some research done, not later, now, on where we can get some external opinions, maybe some novel methods where we can open these roads now rather than later. I mean, even the most cheery estimate for Ford Road is sometime next year. But we've heard conflicting opinions from folks who've done work on major projects that think it can be opened sooner. Maybe it can't. But if we're talking about $10 million, spending $50,000 on an outside opinion to make sure that we are adopting the best solution that will last the longest, be the safest, and also give us the potential option of, can we keep these roads open while we prepare for the bigger reconstruction or replacement? I think we owe it to residents to make sure we know the answers to those questions in certitude, not just we trust someone or we hope for the best. So I think that that's where we really need to have our starting point. But just throwing money at a problem is not the way we do business in Lake County, and it seldom works. And these numbers are just getting higher and higher and higher. I guess I'd ask one last question since you're here, Mr. Matus. How, roughly, what order of magnitude, and if you can't answer this now, if you have to do some homework, I understand, but I would like to know the rough order of magnitude of additional cost that was laying on the county by delaying the jail project from 2017 to today. I would like to know how much less expensive it would have been had that project been engaged in 17 after we got our reports back versus today. Because I think that a lot of the problem we're facing right now is that that very real liability was deferred, and now we're looking at a $170 million project. So every time we talk about this free $114 million without acknowledging that we have a $170 million liability staring us in the face, I think that that kind of, it's been a distracting figure, because it's not really 114 free, not committed, not needed dollars. But I'd like to know how much the county lost by not pulling the trigger on the jail in 17.
Let me be fair to the board at that time, and I'm not trying to say this. Every board has different priorities. With that, since I've started back in 2006, we've been discussing the jail. When I first started back in 2006, there was never a discussion about this building, a new admin center at all. So, different priorities by different boards have come. So, in defending that back in the day, they made their decisions. Someone 6 years from now is going to probably ask me why the heck we did certain things, and I'll say that's the board that I worked for at the time.
And Mr. Matus, I'm not asking you to condemn or defend past decisions. I would like to see a dollar amount of
Gotcha.
how much it cost to make that decision.
Like I said, I just have a past practice with all boards, a lot of elected officials. And just, I took that as a disparaging comment towards all of the boards. Like I said, I defend all you guys at all costs. I know who my bosses are. And like I said, once two of you guys tell me that, I just felt like I needed to say that. But yeah, I will work with that to try to determine a cost with that. Like I said, it's going to be an estimate, just like what we're shooting at with the jail now. That's what we really don't the roads and the jail, that's a huge undertaking all at once, that I don't know what the heck we're gonna do.
Well, fair enough, but I'll follow up by asking, when do you anticipate being able to deliver your estimate to us?
You just asked me just now, so I'm gonna have to look and see. I'm gonna have to talk to HOK. I'm gonna have to see with that, because like I said, it's, we can do simple interest costs, but costs of materials have changed so much just from, with COVID and stuff. I'll try to get it done as soon as possible for you, but I can't commit. I know, you guys have me doing a lot of stuff for a lot of different things right now. I'll put that on the front burner.
Thank you.
But like I said, I need some direction on the jail. I need some direction on the roads, going forward with the budgets. We're getting a daily memo or email about people's wages throughout the county that you guys have got. Like I said, it's not just about the roads and the jail. I want to make sure that if the general fund doesn't have to pay for something, because I've heard you guys loud and clear, economic development, public safety, the roads. We're getting a lot of requests for a lot of different things, and we got to start to really tighten up the belt, like I said. It's easy, like you said, you can throw good money at bad problems. It doesn't make the problem go away, like I said. But I will get you the estimate, but like I said, I just wanted to say, like I said, because after you guys are long and gone, I'm going to defend you guys, the board as a whole as well, like I said, because hindsight's 20/20. You know what I mean? If it's, I wish CD rates were always this high and so forth for the last 9 years. We went from having $800,000 in interest earnings to $11 million this year. That's not going to last. Everything's cyclical. Like I said, and banking your future on investment earnings that are not guaranteed. Look at conveyance fees, recorder fees, and so forth. They're down. And when we had the recession in 2008 and 9, it was the perfect storm. Conveyance fees were down, as well as in investment earnings. Mr. Gill's auto license and gas tax, with people working from home, guess what? His revenue's down slightly. Not as much as I thought it would be, but we try to plan for everything, but I keep hearing 114 million. I keep hearing 114 million. The commissioners put me a task. We have $39 million put aside for the public safety facility. $39 million. Mr. Boyd here? Oh, Mr. Boyd's here. He's been on numerous phone calls with me, with Michelle Hillstrom and Amanda Gordon, our bond counsel. They're commending us by that, having $39 million.
And Mr. Mays, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say that we owe past boards of commissioners for being fiscally responsible, not inflexibly spending that money on other priorities. And in particular, I'd extend a thanks to Commissioner Judy Moran, because I know she was passionate about saving that money. And it's a huge help now when there are so many demands in the general fund.
And that you just summarized my whole point. There's more demands on the general fund than ever. And I think you guys have seen that numerous times. With everything with the public safety, we've talked about that numerous times, just about the wages and so forth to make them competitive. We had to do that. But now people are, like I said, you guys have seen all the memos I've gotten about that and so forth. And like I said, my number one goal here at the county is to carry out your guys' vision. And like I said, I just need you guys to determine. We can't use the money twice. We can't use the money for the jail and the roads. Mm-hmm. It's just not feasible. And like I said, that's I need some direction. Like I said, Jason and I are only recommenders, and we carry your guys' water and do what you guys, a majority, tell us to do. As long as it's not illegal, of course.
We've had too much water lately.
Yeah. So, well, I might need a couple beers after this meeting today. So maybe me and Mr. Boyd will go over to Nemus when it opens up.
Well, the city manager promises us there's going to be more bars and restaurants in Paynesville soon, so we're crossing our fingers on that one.
It's long drive home, though. Long drive home. Better get closer home. So I will get you the estimate thing. Of course, that's going to be an estimate, of course. But yeah, I will get that done sooner rather than later to you.
Thank you.
What else questions do you guys have?
Mr. President.
Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Matus, you and I worked considerably on the roads and bridges, and you know, this number that's in front of me on this is way different than we started. Is it not?
The number that originally was provided to me just from hearsay and so forth was $8 million for the first tranche.
Right, and that was for 3 roads. Now we have 4 roads on this, and I think we heard today that there's more roads that they're bringing up as we go. So I guess where does this stop? Is 10 million enough? Where does, you know, how do we do this? And the thing we would, you know, we haven't spoken recently about this particularly is bonding the way to go? Is it, you know, are those the things the way to go? What's the bond look on something like that to save?
It all depends on what you guys want to do. This plan has developed 100 times over. I don't know what the hell the plan is, to be honest with you right now. From first, you're going to save interest earnings if you pay cash for it. Originally, I was told what we were going to put in a $1.5 million cap and then recommend to the engineer that he had to cut his budget by $500,000 on a yearly basis for a debt service payment. So under that aspect, the general fund would have saved significant amount of money, and Mr. Gill's funds would be decreased by $500,000. Now I hear that option is on the table. So like I said, with the changing, every time something changes, I have to sharpen my pencil again and go over. So when we met on July 7th, Jason, myself, Commissioner, and Mr. Gills, the number one priority was get the first road open. I said, all right, we're going to pay 1.5 million cash. It's 1.3 now. There's ours. I know there was some discussion with the clerk of courts with that and so forth. I don't know where that stands. So you guys have to determine, and that will be my answer for you guys. If you guys are going back to that and having an engineer responsible for the debt service payment, of course I would want to bond it. If not, I would lean towards paying cash for it, because then, if the general fund's responsible, why the heck pay interest over the long term? So you guys need to direct me on what is going on, and I don't know what is going on yet. And it's not that this is a big decision.
So, Mr. President,
Sure.
I wasn't a party to that particular conversation, but are you telling me that we'd essentially determined fat math, that if we could have found $500,000 of savings in the engineer's office, that would have sustained the bond that we were discussing for that initial tranche?
Based on the total estimate of the projects at the time, that's what it was trying to be. It's like I said, it's you got to look at the useful life of roads and so forth with that, continuing projects. But yes, that's what I was directed.
So we had to
towards.
find less than 5% savings in that department to get her done, roughly. I'm just doing the math. Over $10 million a year department budget,
Doesn't sound like
5%,
I have been-
$500,000.
I have been told very numerous times when I've asked questions of different elected officials that we are the budgetary authority, but what they do with their funds is their priority and their decision. You guys are the budgetary authority for everything. So you guys don't have to pay for certain things in certain funds and so forth. You can steer them towards. I've made a lot of recommendations about saving general fund dollars that we don't hold the department's feet to the fire. So, it's the elected officials need to work together, and right now it's frustrating to me because it's all this, that, this. I just want to do the right thing for the people of Lake County. And like I said, I don't know how much I'm going to micromanage Mr. Gills, because I don't micromanage Recorder Lynch and so forth. We give them the budget, and then they can use it for what it's want. I've talked to Dave, I've talked to Mr. Colson, both about that. And that's what some of these departments close 2 hours early.
But Mr. Matus, though, I do,
There-
Mr. President, if I may.
Oh, of course.
I want to be fair to our recorder. I don't think she's ever come in, 2 days before the budget was due and asked for $16 million. I don't think it's fair to compare her budgetary request to this historic one. It's not to say that every department head doesn't ask and some get a partial yes, some get a partial no, et cetera, but this is definitely a unique situation. I think there'd be agreement that it's not comparable to Recorder Lynch's requests.
And it was not, I don't know, replace Recorder Lynch with Treasurer Mike Zern. That's just, each elected official controls their own budget. I've made recommendations about other outside general funds being used for certain projects, and sometimes the elected officials say, no, I'm not doing it.
But the point that I'm trying to make is that the proposal that Commissioner Ragovich had put forward, that we pretty clearly had support for from the Board of Commissioners, was not asking for a major change in the culture of the County Engineer's Office. To ask for less than 5% savings to address this very real emergency and problem, it's not uncommon for the county to ask for across-the-board budget cuts. That happened during COVID. To say, given the extraordinary nature of the funding that you need to come up with less than 5% savings in your budget to cross that finish line, I'm not saying that's the ideal solution, and I'm not saying that reasonable people can't debate what the right solution is. That's not the point that I'm making. I just think it's important, as we really look at the bigger picture, that this was not some crazy proposal where the engineer was going to give up his entire budget and wouldn't have function for anything else. I don't know a department head, I don't know a person at their kitchen table that hasn't had in a given year to find 5% savings on some occasion. Some years are better than others, and it is not an unreasonable proposal to say, let's try to find 5%. And I think that should give us hope, because this is not something that is impossible or out of reach. These are relatively modest numbers and proposals, which is precisely why having a top-bottom performance audit very likely could find greater than 5% savings, which would help the function of the engineer's office. It'll ensure that we don't have these problems going forward. And it could provide an immediate solution. If the engineer is fine with having a bond that his office funds with less than 5% savings, we can do that today. He's chosen to disagree with that proposal, and that's fine. He has a right to do that. But there was a proposal to address this immediately, and I just think that has to be said. Because the idea that there wasn't the will to get it done now, there absolutely was. It's just, this is the commissioner's offer, here's the engineer's counter. I don't want to do it. And I hear that. I wish that he would have, in the interest of expediency, said, let's just get it done. But since he didn't, now we have to find another solution, have a longer conversation, and maybe it'll be easier for the engineer's office to accept a proposal along those lines if we can show them that 5% savings is very doable. So even before we get the performance audit started, I hope that you're going to work with Mr. Gills. Let's take a really hard look at each line in the budget. There may be some savings that we aren't contemplating, and if we can find that now, frankly, I've heard from the engineer, and this is obviously a concern on a different front, that he's to 1/3 staffing in his road department for snow plowing. That's got to be some level of savings. Maybe there is some savings in the budget already. Let's really drill down and make sure we know what we're talking about.
I talked to you on Friday about different other things, and I said that I was going to do, I'll do payroll versus non-payroll related for the engineers and so forth with that. Like I said, the roads and bridges just came up recently, but like I said, I got a request from one court for $400,000 in raises. That will be for the general fund over a couple of years. That's going to compound annually. It's not just, if we do that, maybe we should have a performance audit for a lot of different departments. Like I said, recommendations are only recommendations. Like I said, I can't step on other elected officials' priorities. So I'll work with Mr. Gills. I've worked with him for 17 years. We developed a plan for that additional $5 with this. Why it was, we came up with a plan that I was directed by at least 2 board members. That was their vision. They told me carry it out. It was done. This building, we noted it and it ended up paying cash for it. You know why we did that? Because there was a vision, there was a plan. We carried it out, Jason and I. Jason and I have worked together way too long, but we work good off each other. I think he would say the same thing. But we need vision. Like I said, we need your thoughts, your vision, and we'll give you recommendations, and then you guys decide. The nice thing is about Jason and I, we're not elected officials. We don't have to worry about getting elected again. All we do is provide you. You guys make the decisions. So, like I said, I'm not trying to deer. This project has went from bonding to cash to doing a hybrid. You can do a hybrid. Maybe it's not 500,000, maybe it's 250. I don't know. I've given you guys all those options. I just need direction. So, and I'm not trying to put this on. Commissioner Regovich was at that meeting. He said, get it started. Mr. Gills was there at the meeting, said, I want to get it started. That's why we did the 1.3 cash. The first project's going. I need to know about project 2 and project 3 and apparently now project 4 and tranche 1. I just need some direction, like I said. And I just, like I said, I've kept bond counsel in the loop of, and they asked me any update, anything. I said, hell if I know right now. I said, I know we're paying cash for 1, and then I'm trying to develop a plan for projects 2, 3, and 4 now, apparently in tranche 1. So, you guys will have to determine, are we going to use economic development? Are we going to go into the budget stabilization? I listened to the meeting before. You guys hit upon it before. The recession. I learned a lot from that to create a budget stabilization and a payroll liability. Because if you don't have that in a recession, there was a lot of cuts. A lot of sleepless nights. Going over to talking to the sheriff's department when sheriff was then in charge of the jail saying, we're gonna lay people off. I don't wanna have that. I had a lot of sleepless nights with that. And now with this stuff, I mean, there's a lot going on. Public safety facility, law enforcement totally. We all saw the prosecutors with their presentation about the wages. You guys addressed that. That's what was one of your priorities. You guys, that's why I wrote you guys that email. I had it drafted for about a week. I had Jason look at it, I had Joel look at it, so we were all on the same page. We carry out your vision. You guys, we tell you where the funds are, and you guys tell us, carry out your vision. I need some direction on the jail, as well as the roads. I got direction from a consensus on the public safety. You guys are all really went to bat for the sheriff. I know we addressed some people in the courts already. I know one other court that I've talked to 2 of you each individually about that court, and I know that's very important to you guys as well. We address the prosecutor's office, public defender. So I'm trying to carry out your vision. I just sometimes, I don't have the clear vision yet.
Mr. Mays, I want to seek your recommendations because I believe in what you do and how you do it. So when I make my decisions up here, it's with your recommendations, Jason's recommendations in hand. So I just want you to know that I appreciate getting those recommendations.
I appreciate
and your vision of how to do it maybe differently or all the options available.
Like I said, I think we've beaten this dead horse about the roads and bridges. I've given you both, all 3 options. I need to know, like I said, what are we going to do? Or can we earmark that money from the engineers? I personally don't, but think we probably can dictate to him because we're the budgetary authority. But I'm anxious to see what Prosecutor Colson puts out with regards to that. So that might be an influence on what it is. I don't know. Are we going to make it mandated that he cut 500,000, or are we not? That is a big question that I have that I don't know what your guys' answer is.
I mean, Mr. President, that would be a game changer if we could just say, hold back 500,000, let's do it now. I mean, it would be a game changer. So I'm looking forward to the prosecutor's opinion there. But frankly, even if we can't mandate it, if we can get that cooperation, we can do it now. And that was Commissioner Regovich's initial proposal. And I just think it's important not to beat the dead horse, but to repeat, because it bears repeating, as important as it is, that it's not a huge percentage of the budget. And there have been departments who have made far bigger sacrifices to meet far less significant emergencies. So I once again want to commend you, Commissioner Regovich, Mr. Boyd, for working so hard to find a compromise that was doable. Now, it wasn't accepted, but if there's a way we can just make it happen, I'd say, let's do it. Let's do it today. If we can just say, let's hold back that $500,000 a year, we'll have that debt service, we'll get her done, that's a wonderful thing. If we can't do that, then we have to try to show multiple paths for the engineer's office to have that long-term solution. And hopefully, when they see from a top-down audit exactly where they can have savings, they go, okay, that is a workable solution for us. Collaboration is harder than just a mandate. If we can mandate, then I think this is serious enough that we need to. But if we don't have that authority, we have to keep trying to find a solution that's acceptable to both the commissioner's office and the engineers. But if there's a simple fix where we can just say, hey, hold back 500,000, you're going to have to find a way to make that work, a performance audit will help you, but you'll have some time to get there because it won't hit you till next year. That would be ideal for the county and for the taxpayer, and I'd love to do that. If we can't, we're going to have to keep negotiating, but if we can, that's an immediate fix, and that would be a wonderful start of fall present from the prosecutor's office. So let's hope that in addition to the wide-ranging authority that we have over choosing which road is paved next, according to the prosecutor, that we also have the ability to more laser in on a departmental budget to make sure we can get these priorities met.
Mr. President, if I may.
Sir.
Commissioner, I need to understand your question because this board, as you know, you're required to provide reasonable budgetary appropriations to every elected official. Now, when you do provide that, I know this board knows this, but you cannot dictate to those various departments, officials, how they spend their money.
Well, I want to make sure we are sure about that. That there is no way, whatever mechanical or legal means, that we can move money from one pot to the other, hold it back for a bond issue. Let's get creative and see if there's a way. And while you're working on that, we'll continue to see if there's a compromise that the engineer can accept. If he simply accepted the compromise, this debate would be over. But I think we have to be open to looking here and seeing, is there any way that we can say we want X percent of this budget to be dedicated to this road project, this debt payment, etc. If there's any legal means to do it. And the answer may be no, but I think we need to circle back and make sure we know for sure, because that would solve the problem today.
I don't believe there's authority for that. Now that I'm hearing you speak, I will research it, but this board cannot dictate how another elected official runs their office. That's my shoot from the hip, but I will research it more thoroughly.
But maybe in our appropriations we can appropriate the money for specific purposes. I don't know. Let's find out. I want you to think outside the box. Is there any way that a vote of the Board of Commissioners could say, let's rededicate this amount of funding in the engineer's office to either this bond or this project? Because you're telling us in this memo that we can tell the engineer, you must do this road first, this road second, this road third. So I'm asking, can we say you must spend X percent or dollar amount of your budget on this road, that road, that road? Because it's one thing for us to, maybe we can just say, you have to repave this road, because you're telling us we can decide the ordering, and then the only means available to the engineer is to, hold back X percent for a bond. I'm just asking you to look at the legal milieu and show us, is there a practical way to get from point A to point B, or we can just say, Mr. Engineer, here's the memo that we had. You didn't want the memo, but is there another way we can get to the same place? Because that place means there's immediate funding for those roads. And that place means a longer term solution. And that place means other departments like the recorder and the treasurer, see that, when a department has an extraordinary need, they have to participate in the solution. They can't just say that every other department takes the hit.
Well, again, yes, the board has the final authority over which roads get paved and worked on. My only point is that if the roads that are problematic, that cause potential damages to the county, that is the liability of the Board of Commissioners. It falls upon your shoulders.
But once again, if we can decide which road is paved first, can we just tell the engineer, pave this road by X date? And then he's then forced within his budget to find a way to do it. I mean, I'm trying to understand what this authority is you've described, where we can tell him which road to pave next and when. I mean, if it's as simple as we just say, hey, pave these roads, and we provide a layout for how he can do it, and we did provide one potential solution. Maybe we could just leave it at that and say, by resolution, we've ordered the engineer's office to pave this road next, to pave Ford Road. Here's a way that you can do it financially. If you can find another way, good for you, but this is the only one we're providing. Does he then have to proceed to pave the road? Because I'm trying to understand what your memo says in terms of the commissioners have the authority, according to the Attorney General, as to which road is paved next.
Within reason, you should follow the recommendations of an engineer or a Board of Commissioners, I should say, with regard to safety issues, things like that. And if you read that Attorney General opinion, that does make it clear. But yes, it is this board that has the ultimate authority over which projects get done, again, within reason. Safety, reasonableness is always a backdrop. Safety is, I would think, would be a primary
Well, once again, I
concern.
think that someone listening at home would say, then why don't the commissioners just say, deal with this first tranche that you yourself have identified as necessary. We have provided a means for you to do that by putting, $1.3 million in your fund and authorizing a bond issue. If you want to do it a different way within your funding, go for it, but we are ordering you to do these roads by X date. Within reason, of course, because we know there are supply chain and other issues. I mean, can we do that?
Yes, you have the ultimate authority. Again, reasonableness is the backdrop.
Well, then I think we have a solution right there.
On which roads that you want repaired. I'm trying to be real clear here. That's what the Attorney General says. It's the Board of Commissioners that is the final authority on which roads to repair. It's the engineer that provides an annual report and makes recommendations and draws up plans and specifications for any given repair, but this board does not have to follow those. But
Well, as Mr. Matus has explained, there are many different ways that a project can be funded, and there are even hybrids amongst those different ways. So the question I'm asking is if the commissioners exercise their authority and say, for year 2024, you're going to repair these 3 roads, period. We've exercised our authority. We've directed the engineer's office that these are the priority, repair these roads. Of course, within reason, if the world ends, can't be done. And we offer the engineer one budgetary solution to do it. Does the engineer then have the ability to say, well, I don't like that solution, so I'm going to just do nothing? Can he just say, hey, you've directed me to repair these roads, but I don't like the idea of a bond issue or having to find savings in my office, so I'll just sit on them and not do it? Or does he have to then proceed one way or the other? Not necessarily the commissioner's way, but within the budget that the commissioners have appropriated for him. So I think that's a fundamental question. Can the engineer just ignore the commissioner's authority and not repave those roads because he doesn't like the funding mechanism?
the Attorney General opinion that we cite in our opinion is in our memorandum here is very clear. It's in addition to the appropriation of the reasonable funding necessary. So you do have to appropriate funding necessary for whatever projects you want done. And general fund money can be used for these projects. I'll defer to Mr. Matus on his expertise with regard to budgets.
But it's also possible for engineers' monies to be used for these projects and for a bond. So there are multiple ways that you could pay for those projects. And my question is, if the commissioners say, do these projects, period, here's what we're giving you, make it work, can the engineer then say, well, that is one way it could be paid for, but I don't like that funding mechanism, so I choose not to do the projects? Or is the engineer then required to do the projects committed to him by the commissioner's office? I think that's a fundamental question we need answered.
Does it not come back to the reasonable funding necessary? Does it not always come back to that?
It does, and there is, obviously, the law frowns upon elected officials not trying to work in the spirit of cooperation.
Well, once again, there are multiple ways that a project can be funded, and at the end of the day, the important thing is that the road is paved. So I would hope that the law would reasonably say, well, if the commissioners have provided one pathway forward, even if it's not the favored or favorite pathway by the engineer's office, that it would be the priority to pave the road, not to, I want to pay for it this way rather than that way. But once again, I'll leave it to you to give us a more detailed response later. I know this puts you on the spot, but if we have the authority to say, pave this road, here's the funding mechanism we're going to use, call it a day, I think that solves a lot of issues, because now we don't need a memorandum of understanding. The commissioners can just say, here's the way we're doing it, let's get it done. We already have a plan that would work with relatively modest adjustments in the engineer's office. And if a memo of understanding isn't the right tool to do it, if it's just a resolution ordering it, I'm open to that.
Well, again, I don't think it's, I'm trying to be very diplomatic here. The Board of Commissioners does give out the budgets to the various elected officials. This board cannot control, though, how that elected official runs her or his office.
That's fair.
That's what I want to make very clear here.
But there's a distinction, because you've identified in your memo a specific authority of the commissioner according to the Attorney General's interpretation, which I gather that your office shares. I recognize the AG is not a court, but nonetheless, you're representing to us in this memo that you agree with the AG's opinion, that the commissioners have the authority to decide which roads, which bridges are fixed, repaired, in what order. If we really have the authority to say, pave Ford Road now, then I don't see how the engineer can say, well, I do have enough money to do it by making the following adjustments, which the budget office has laid out on behalf of the commissioners, but I don't like that mechanism, so I'm choosing to ignore your resolution to repave this road because I'm waiting until we get funding another way. I mean, I'm trying to understand whether the engineer gets to pick how it's funded, or whether he just has to follow the priorities set by the commissioners as laid out by the AG. Because if we set the priority and he just has to use any reasonable method, well, a reasonable method was already proposed. If that's the solution, we already have the hard work done. We've done most of the math, most of the numbers. So let's find out whether or not we can accomplish that.
You can pick the roads to be repaired, but you also have to provide reasonable appropriations for that.
And there are more than one way to provide those appropriations.
Absolutely. There's many different ways that Mr. Matus started delving into.
So I guess the critical question is, can we say, here's 3 different ways that we can pay for it, we've chosen option A. And if the commissioners choose option A, that you find savings within your department of X, you take advantage of this bond issue, can the engineer say, well, I don't like that method, I'll just not do the road this year, even though you've ordered me to under your authority under the ORC? I think that that's a critical follow-up here, because if we really have this grant of authority to decide which roads are paved which year, I think it's a pretty simple situation. Let's just say get it done.
And again, Commissioner, it's in addition to the appropriation of the reasonable funding. And a memorandum of understanding really that's worthless in my opinion. Memorandum of understanding is nothing.
Well, we're past that. What I'm saying is, if we provide one reasonable option to fund the project, the question is, can the engineer say, well, I prefer option B over option A, so I'm just doing nothing until you give me option A? Or does he have to take any reasonable means of funding the project that the commissioners offer once they've said this road needs to be done? That's the narrow question that I'm asking.
Well, we'll have that discussion after the meeting and
Thank you.
deal with that.
I guess that begs the question, though, can we order or direct the engineer to pave certain roads and ignore the next 20 or 30 years worth of roads at that expense? Can we say, you will take care of these roads today. You will take on the debt service necessary today, but you're not going to be able to pave another road for the next 20 or 30 years. Do we have the authority to encumber that and cripple?
Now we're getting into hypotheticals, Commissioner,
Well,
quite
I'm
frankly.
talking
But
statutory, and I guess I realize it's not a fair question.
everything is within reason.
Within
That's the point. The engineer does have to plan for the future and projects down the road, so to speak. I don't know what else I can say other than, yes, this board does have to provide reasonable appropriations for the engineer to do his job. And make sure that you, the Board of Commissioners, are maintaining the roads in a reasonable fashion and safe.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. President,
Sir,
I think what I'd like to see before me is if we have Payne Road ready and we have the estimates for that, we know the actual cost, why aren't we voting just on Payne Road at this point, as we stated before, we've been doing in the past? Now, let's take a bite at the apple, keep the momentum going on what we're doing and keep our commitment going. I'm sure it's a lot less cost than $10 million. So I would love to see what those estimates are and move forward maybe just on Payne Road, and we could appropriate the money to the account that we see forward. We still have an commitment from the clerk of courts that we have to figure out how we're going to use that now, or where that stands. So there's a lot of again, different funding avenues.
thank you, sir. So, if I could just tie some things up here. So, engineer, back during the budget process earlier this year, you did in fact notify this board in a timely way when you became aware that all sources of funding had been exhausted, all attempts to find outside funding. You came to this board at a timely way. You did not hold the information back. You didn't sweep it under the rug, which can become quite the lumpy rug because of the desire to sweep things under the rug and conceal it. You brought it out for this, I will admit, unexpectedly long deliberation and debate on this issue. But you did bring it forward in a timely way, and you did it in a way that was complete, comprehensive, and should not have been a surprise to anyone who had been reading your road and bridge reports for the last several years. There's discussion about finding a savings. I believe the number was $500,000. It does appear that a savings that does not look to the future is not a savings, because if you're paying for today's expenses at the cost of the future, we're just going to make somebody else's problem be a problem. And I'm glad to hear there was some hope here in this discussion about the memorandum of understanding. As I've repeatedly said, it was not supported by law. I certainly would never ask you to waive your attorney-client privilege to go into the details, but there was a presumption and discussion that this was a reasonable method proposed. Unfortunately, again, that was not supported by law. I'm happy to hear that Commissioner Pleshek says we're past that, and I was quite comforted to hear our legal counsel say that the MOU was worthless. Good word, thank you. That summed it up in a beautiful way. So, I would like to, though, go back to Budget Director Matus. I do not believe Commissioner Pleshek intentionally gave you an impossible task. I think it is forgivable that Commissioner Pleshek perhaps does not understand that all estimates are not equal. What was considered in each estimate is key. I think when you start to look into this, you're going to find that there were a couple of reviews done, some prior to my time here, others under my watch. The original review and estimate was somewhat questionable. We went back and reviewed it in more detail. That number then more than doubled. And then when we retained HOK to do a more full-scale review, I think you're going to find that we are not only trying to compare apples to oranges, we're trying to compare apples to grapes and mustard seeds and all kinds of other unrelated things. So don't be surprised if when you talk to HOK, they come back and tell you, you can't compare this report to that report because they are vastly different in scope. So, and I do appreciate that we get that out to the public, because that will be a common misconception that needs to be addressed now before it becomes a growing cancer on this worthy and worthwhile project that we are working so diligently on. Okay, and I think Commissioner Regovich also said he would like to proceed forward with something that was recommended by Mike Matus. Mike, I do want to say you were an active participant in the creation of this draft resolution, and you were an active advocate to assign the $10 million number. So is it safe to say that the draft resolution that came from our prosecutor's office in response to all these discussions, deliberations, that this document did in fact reflect your recommendation?
Well,
You can go yes or no on that if you want, or because I know there was a lot of talk. Because we were working.
it's
with
been
the
a lot of
prosecutor
unfair
again.
questions so far, in my opinion. That's just my opinion.
Well, we're trying to brush you off the plate, you know.
I'm not an engineer. I was told that the project's $10 million. What the hell do I know? I don't know how to design a road. I don't know how to pave a road. Look at me. That ain't gonna happen. So I work with Mr. Boyd on the creation of that resolution of the $10 million. It's a vanilla resolution. All resolutions are very vanilla. It outlines the estimate and the projects. And I work with Mr. Hackman and Mr. Boyd to say how much the first project was, of 1.3 million. So, was I an active participant in reviewing that resolution for content of right numbers? Yes. Is it mine? Like I said, I gave options: pay cash, bond it, hybrid. That's all I can do. So to answer, I'm not trying to not answer your question. Yes, the numbers in the resolution I reviewed, I worked with Dave and I worked with Jason on that. But is that $10 million good? No, but I mean, Mr. Gills is the engineer and he's been doing it for a long time. So I don't know if that answers your question, but how I interpreted your question, I think I answered it. How's that?
Fair enough. Okay, well, I guess this is more of a technical question to Summer. Do you want to end this and then we can start the commissioner meeting? All right, if there's nothing further in this work session, I think we've very comprehensively and very openly and fairly had discussions and deliberations, and I believe this will carry forward into our commissioner meeting. If there's nothing further, we will, no, this is not to public participation. You have a credit card.
I found it on the floor.
Oh, you found a credit card?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, Summer, thank you for joining us. We'll